The knock on the door came in the dead of the storm, but it wasn't the wind. Wesley Grant knew the difference. He'd lived in this Montana cabin for 7 years, and in that time, he'd learned the language of the wind. He knew its lonely howl, its angry shriek, its quiet, mournful sigh. This was different. This was the soft, hesitant tap of a human hand, and nobody came to Wesley Grant's door. Not anymore. He froze, his hand halfway to the coffee pot on the stove. The horses in the barn had been restless for an hour, a sure sign that something was out there, something that didn't belong. The knock came again, a little louder this time, a desperate little scratch against the wood. Wesley reached for the rifle propped against the wall. He didn't check if it was loaded. It was always loaded. He swung the door open and the storm lunged in, a blast of ice and fury. And in the middle of it, a shape. A woman, so drenched and frozen she seemed more ghost than human. Her coat was a thin, useless rag. Her cheeks were raw. In her arms, she clutched a bundle wrapped in a stained blanket. The bundle moved, and a weak, pitiful cry was torn away by the wind. Wesley just stared, his face a mask carved from stone. The woman's eyes, wide and glassy with exhaustion, locked onto his. "I saw the sign in town," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. "The one for a cook." She swallowed, a painful-looking motion. "I can work. We need a place. Just for a while." Wesley's gaze dropped to the bundle. A baby, then to her hands, blue and raw at the fingertips. There was no horse, no wagon, just her own desperate tracks leading out of the darkness and ending at his door. "You alone?" he asked, his voice rough. She hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "Yes." It was a lie. He knew it in his gut. But the danger wasn't coming from her. It was coming for her. "Get in," he said, stepping aside. She practically fell over the threshold, her knees buckling as the cabin's warmth hit her. Wesley shut the door, and the world went silent, except for the crackle of the fire. "Name's Elena," she whispered, her body trembling. The baby, a boy, began to cry in earnest. "There's a chair by the fire," Wesley said, his voice flat. He didn't offer to help. He just watched as she stumbled to the old rocker and sank into it, unwrapping her son. The child's face was red and pinched with cold. Wesley grabbed a wool blanket and draped it over her shoulders. He didn't ask. He just did it. "You running from someone?" he asked, his back to her as he stoked the fire. She flinched. "My husband," she finally said. "He died." The words were clipped, empty, another lie, or at least not the whole truth. Later, after she'd forced down some cold beans, he showed her to the spare room. His wife Anna's room, a room he hadn't entered in 5 years. Elena didn't ask why it smelled of lavender and dust. She just laid the baby on the bed and curled up beside him, fully clothed, as if ready to run at a moment's notice. Wesley didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table cleaning a rifle he'd already cleaned that morning. The woman in his house was a liar. She was in trouble. And she had brought that trouble right to his door. He just didn't know yet that it was the same trouble that had put his own wife in the ground. For 3 days, the cabin was filled with a new kind of silence. It wasn't the empty, hollow quiet Wesley was used to. It was the tense, watchful quiet of 2 strangers sharing a space, each weighed down by secrets. Elena was a ghost in his house. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended his torn shirts with tiny, perfect stitches. She moved with a wariness, as if expecting a blow at any moment. The baby, Noah, was her anchor. She held him, rocked him, hummed to him in a low, sad voice that seemed to get tangled in the rafters. Wesley watched her. He saw the old, faded bruises on her arms when her sleeves rode up. He saw the way she flinched when he set a log on the fire too loudly. He didn't ask questions. He knew the answers. He'd seen women like her before, women who had learned to make themselves small to survive. He found himself leaving extra firewood by the door, making sure the water bucket was always full. Small things. Mute apologies for the cruelty of other men. On the fourth morning, he was splitting wood when he saw them. Two riders on the ridge overlooking his property. They weren't moving fast, they were watching. One of them raised a spyglass. Wesley didn't stop his work. He just kept swinging the axe, the rhythmic thud a steady beat of defiance. But he felt their eyes on his back, cold and calculating. They were looking for something. Or someone. That night, he told her, two men on the ridge. Looked like trackers. Elena's hands, which were kneading dough on the table, went still. Did they see me? They saw the house, he said. That's enough for now. They're from his family, she said, her voice a dead, flat whisper. My husband's. He told me they'd never let me go. So, the husband wasn't dead after all. Another lie. Why are they after you? Wesley asked, his own voice low. He thinks Noah isn't his, she said, her eyes fixed on the dough. He said I shamed him. He tried to take the baby from me. I fought back. He fell. I ran. She finally looked up, her eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen before. I left him for dead. I wish I had been right. The confession settled between them, heavy and dangerous. This was more than just a domestic dispute. This was a blood feud. You and the boy, you can stay, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A line drawn in the dirt. Her shoulders slumped with a relief so profound it seemed to hurt. Why? She asked, her voice cracking. You don't know me. I know enough, he said. The next day, a neighbor, Martha Bellamy, rode up to the ranch. She was a tough old woman, a friend of Anna's, and one of the few people who still spoke to Wesley. She carried a basket of preserves and a worried look. Saw riders near your property, Wesley, she said, her sharp eyes taking in Elena and the baby. They were asking questions in town about a woman and a child. She turned to Elena. You be careful, girl. Some men believe a wife is property, and they'll go to war to get their property back. She then looked back at Wesley, and her voice dropped. This feels familiar, Wesley. Too familiar. It feels like what happened to Anna. Wesley froze. What are you talking about? Anna died of a fever. Martha shook her head slowly, a deep sadness in her eyes. No, Wesley, Anna didn't die of a fever. She died helping another woman just like this one run from an abusive husband. A powerful man with a powerful family. That woman got away. Anna didn't. They made it look like the fever. I never told you because I was afraid of what you'd do. The world tilted. 7 years of grief. 7 years of guilt for being away when his wife died. It was all a lie. Anna hadn't just died. She'd been murdered. And now the same kind of evil was standing on his doorstep again. This wasn't Elena's fight anymore. It was his. The letter was nailed to his barn door. One sentence, written in a stark, angry script. She's mine. I'm coming to get her. There was no signature. It didn't need one. Wesley tore it down, his knuckles white. The past wasn't just repeating itself. It was coming to finish the job. He walked back to the house, the crumpled paper in his fist. Elena was in the garden, a small patch of earth she'd claimed behind the barn. She was on her knees, turning the soil, Noah sleeping in a basket nearby. For a moment, she looked peaceful, happy even. He hated that he had to be the one to shatter it. He showed her the note. The color drained from her face. Derek, she whispered. Her husband, alive, and coming for her. I have to leave, she said, scrambling to her feet. I can't bring this down on you. You're not going anywhere, Wesley said, his voice a low growl. This fight was mine long before you got here. He told her what Martha had revealed. About Anna. About the woman she'd tried to save. What was her name? Elena asked, her voice shaking. I don't know, Wesley admitted. Martha said she was a young mother, running from a man who thought he owned her. He looked at Elena, at the fierce, protective way she stood over her son, and he saw a ghost. He saw the woman Anna had died for, and he knew he couldn't let it happen again. They spent the next 2 days turning the ranch into a fortress. Wesley boarded up the windows, leaving only small slits to shoot through. He cleaned every weapon he owned, laying them out on the kitchen table: rifles, shotguns, pistols, an arsenal built for a war. Elena worked beside him. She wasn't the terrified woman who had collapsed on his porch. She was a soldier. She learned how to load and fire a rifle, her hands steady, her eyes clear. "He'll come at night," she said. "He always liked the dark. It hides what he really is." Martha returned with her brother, a quiet, weathered man with a shotgun and eyes that had seen too much. "Sheriff's on his way," she said, "but he's a day's ride out. You're on your own till then." That night they didn't light the lamps. They sat in the dark, listening. The wind had picked up, a low moan that sounded like a warning. Then just after midnight they heard it. The soft nicker of a horse. They weren't coming in loud. They were trying to be quiet. They were hunting. Mason took a position at the front window, Martha at the back. Elena stood in the shadows of the hallway, shotgun ready, her body a shield between the fight and the room where her son slept. A floorboard creaked on the porch. A shadow moved past the window. Then another. Wesley counted 3, maybe 4. The front door splintered, kicked in with a single violent blow. A man burst through, pistol raised. Wesley fired. The man dropped. Gunfire erupted from all sides. The cabin was filled with the roar of rifles and the smell of gunpowder. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Through the chaos, Elena heard a voice she knew, a voice that haunted her nightmares. "Elena, I know you're in there, you worthless whore. I've come to take what's mine." It was Derek. He was out there directing them. Another of his men tried to climb through a side window. Martha's shotgun boomed, and the man fell back with a scream. But there were too many. They were being overwhelmed. Wesley was pinned down, reloading, when a third man broke through the back door and charged him, a knife gleaming in his hand. Wesley didn't have time to raise his rifle, but Elena did. She stepped out of the shadows, the shotgun in her hands. She didn't hesitate. The blast threw the man backward. Wesley stared at her, his eyes wide in the flickering light from the muzzle flashes. She had just saved his life. "Get down!" she screamed, pulling him to the floor as a spray of bullets tore through the wall where he'd been standing. Outside, Derek roared in frustration. "Burn it! Burn the whole damn thing to the ground!" They heard the splash of kerosene against the outside walls, then a flicker of orange light under the door. The cabin was on fire. They were trapped. "The cellar!" Wesley yelled, pulling Elena toward a trapdoor in the floor. "There's a tunnel! It leads to the barn!" He went first, helping Martha and her brother down. Elena grabbed Noah from his cradle, wrapping him tight, his small body blessedly still asleep through the noise. She handed him down to Wesley before climbing down herself. As Wesley pulled the trapdoor shut, the fire above them roared to life, the sound of a hungry beast. The tunnel was dark, narrow, and smelled of damp earth. They crawled on their hands and knees, the sound of the fire a terrifying roar above them. They emerged in the musty darkness of the barn, gasping for air. Through the cracks in the walls, they could see the cabin engulfed in flames, a funeral pyre against the night sky. Derek and his remaining men stood watching, silhouetted against the fire, their faces lit with triumph. They thought they had won. "They'll come here next," Wesley whispered, reloading his rifle. "Looking for the bodies." "Then we won't be here," Elena said. Her eyes were hard, reflecting the firelight. She handed Noah to Martha. "Keep him safe." She picked up the shotgun. "This ends tonight." Just as Derek and his men approached the barn, the doors swung open. But it wasn't Wesley who stood there. It was Elena. "Looking for me?" she called out, her voice ringing with a cold fury. Derek stopped, a look of shock on his face. "You should have stayed in the fire," he snarled. "You should have stayed in the river," she shot back. Behind her, Wesley and Martha's brother opened fire from the barn's loft. The surprise was total. One of Derek's men went down. The other scrambled for cover, but Derek only had eyes for Elena. He raised his pistol, a mad rage in his eyes. "You're mine!" he screamed. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from his gun. Sheriff Dobbins and 3 deputies had arrived, riding hard into the clearing. Derek spun around, caught. He had nowhere to run. He looked from the sheriff to Elena, his face a mask of pure hatred. Then he turned the gun on himself. The final gunshot echoed in the sudden ringing silence. Elena stood unmoving as the smoke cleared. Wesley came to her side, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "It's over," he whispered. Elena looked at the burning ruins of the cabin, the place that had been her sanctuary. Then she looked at Wesley, at Martha holding her sleeping son. "No," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "It's just beginning." The sun rose on a scene of devastation. The cabin was a smoldering ruin, a black scar on the landscape. But in the yard, a small group of people stood together, survivors bound by the night's fire and violence. Sheriff Dobbins clapped Wesley on the shoulder. "You did good, Grant. You both did." He looked at Elena with a newfound respect. "His family will hear about this, but the law is on your side now. It's over." As the sheriff and his men took the bodies away, Martha came to Elena, Noah still asleep in her arms. "You're welcome at my place," she offered, "for as long as you need." Elena looked at the smoking remains of the cabin, then at Wesley. "Thank you, Martha, but I think we're already home." They spent the next few months rebuilding, not just the cabin, but their lives. The town, hearing the story, rallied around them. Men showed up with lumber and tools. Women brought food and quilts. The house that rose from the ashes was bigger than the old one, with a new room for Noah and a wide porch for watching sunsets. The garden Elena had planted was miraculously untouched by the fire. It flourished, a stubborn patch of green in the scarred landscape. One evening, as they sat on the new porch, Noah took his first wobbly steps, toddling from Elena's outstretched hands to Wesley's. Wesley swung him up into the air, and the baby's delighted laugh was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Elena came and stood beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Anna would have liked this," Wesley said, his voice thick. "She would have loved him." "She would have been proud of you," Elena said softly. Later that night, after Noah was asleep, Wesley gave her a small, hand-carved box. Inside was a simple silver ring. "I know it's not much," he started. She put a finger to his lips. "It's everything." They were married by the river, the same river where Elena had thought her nightmare had ended, but where it had really just begun to change. It was a quiet ceremony, with just Martha and her brother and the sheriff as witnesses. Noah, dressed in a tiny new shirt, clapped his hands through the whole thing. The past wasn't gone. Its ghosts would always walk with them, but they were no longer haunted. They were a family, forged in fire and rooted in the stubborn, resilient Montana soil. They had faced the storm and survived, and in the quiet that followed, they had found not just peace, but a love as strong and wild as the land they called home. If you were moved by Elena's journey from victim to survivor and believe in the power of courage to rewrite our darkest chapters, let us know by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Every story of survival reminds us that even after the most devastating fires, new life can and will grow. Don't forget to hit the bell for more stories of the untamed West, where the greatest battles are fought not with guns, but with the heart.